last year government announced 13 reforms to combat illicit trade, and we have developed a framework to track progress on these reforms. Let me start with quickly defining what is illicit trade. So illicit trade it's a broad term, and it implies smuggled goods such as petroleum, diesel, vehicles, cigarettes. It includes counterfeit items, mostly prevalent in pharmaceutical sector, consumer goods and cosmetics. And third is locally manufactured but tax evaded goods. And cigarette tobacco sector is a prominent example. So what are the consequences of illicit trades? There are three main consequences. First is the fiscal burden. We already have a narrow tax base, and our tax to GDP ratio hovers around 9 to 11%. And with prevalence and growth in illicit trade, or potential tax revenues are falling. So it is a burden on compliant taxpayers. Second is market distortion. Compliant businesses have to face competition from tax evading businesses, so it's a problem for them. Third is public safety. If public is consuming counterfeit and unsafe products, then there is a safety concern. So this is international standing of Pakistan. TRACIT publishes illicit trade index, and ranking of Pakistan in 2025 index was 101 out of 158 countries with a score of 44.5, while the global average was around 50. So they have they score based on 6 dimensions, and Pakistan is performing not well in 5 dimensions. We are doing well in only 1 dimension, which is trade, customs and borders. So this is an appeal advertised last week by Oil Companies Advisory Council, and they have highlighted that around 6 million liters of petroleum products are smuggled into Pakistan every day, and the loss is around 280 billion rupees, which is around $1 billion US. So this shows that illicit trade is prevalent and it's growing. So last year, government acknowledged prevalence of illicit trade and announced 13 reforms to combat illicit trade, spanning across customs, taxation and enforcement. So the idea was to adopt modern technologies which have been adopted globally, and they have been proven effective in developed economies. So we are trying to bring in technology and develop mechanisms to combat illicit trade in Pakistan. So these reforms can be classified into 3 broad categories. First is customs and trade facilitation, and the first reforms is introduction of digital cargo tracking system and e-bility. So the idea is to track real-time tracking of consignments, cargoes with the help of digital receipts, and this will solve the problem of misdeclaration, under-declaration, under-invoicing. Next reform is digital establishment of digital enforcement stations. So these stations are just like a service area on motorways. A requisite infrastructure will be developed for the inspection and enforcement, which will include tracking stations, inspection area, lodging facility for the custom personnel, and etc. These will be developed across high-risk transit routes throughout the country. Next reform is centralized customs assessment. So the idea is to use AI-assisted tools to remotely assess the GDs, goods declarations, and this is the step in the direction of faceless assessment. So the idea is to eliminate or end the contact between the importer and the appraiser. Next reform is port and cargo discipline. So the idea is to enforce binding timelines such as 20 days for home consumption or warehousing and 30 days for declaration filing and cargo removal, so that indefinite cargo holding can be eliminated. Next reform area is enforcement and deterrence. So government has announced establishment of Customs Command Fund. The officers and informers will be rewarded through the proceeds from confiscated goods. And the idea is to not only reward the officers or informers, but to generate revenues to further carry out these enforcement activities. Next is Directorate Restructuring and Risk Management System 2.0. So there has been some restructuring inside FBR. Intelligence and Investigation and Risk Management Directorates have been merged, and Customs Department has been entrusted to lead and carry out these enforcement activities. Furthermore, AI-based Risk Management System 2.0 has been established, and it has been piloted in Karachi. And the idea is to extend these into other provincial capitals. Next is presumption against smuggled goods. So the reform is that vehicles with tempered, cut and weld or re-stamped chassis numbers will be considered smuggled, and government will confiscate these vehicles, because mostly these vehicles are used not only for smuggling but also for terrorism activities. Next reform is control of counterfeit excisable goods. So the excise powers have been transferred to provincial excise department, so they can also provide support in the enforcement and confiscation of smuggled goods. Third reform area is tax compliance and data sharing. So the first reform is courier misuse control. Duty-free threshold has been reduced from 5,000 to 1,000 rupees, and withholding tax has also been introduced. The idea is that previously imports were carried out and they were fragmented to evade taxes. Next reform is restriction on transactions of ineligible persons. So those people who are non-filers or those who under-declare their income. So transactions of such people will be barred, such as vehicle purchases, property transfers, and cash withdrawals. The next reform is criminalization of tax fraud. In the Finance Act, government clearly defined fraudulent activities such as fake invoices or record temporary. They have announced these activities as criminal offences with punishments such as imprisonment up to 5 years. Next reform is data sharing. So FBR will share data with the banks, online marketplaces, and payment intermediaries, so that the complete record of the taxpayers will be shared and verified. Last reform is sales tax enforcement. So another proposal was to crack down on unregistered and non-filer persons by freezing their bank accounts, block their property transfers, and seal their business premises. So we have developed a 4-stage framework to track progress on the reform. Stage 0 is legislation only, where a legal instrument has been enacted or notified, but no procurement, staffing, or operational activity has been recorded. Stage 1, which is administratively initiated. In this stage, procurement, contracting, staffing, or system design is underway, but the overall system is not yet functioning. Next stage is stage 2, which is partially operational, in which system or unit is live in at least one location, and there are outputs are recorded. And last stage is fully operational, where their system is operational in all locations, outputs are recorded and measured and published. This is the list of indicators which will be tracked for each reform, such as for digital cargo system, we will look into the share of consignments tracked through cargo tracking system, number of e-bility documents issued. For digital enforcement stations, we will look into how many stations are established, whether central control unit is operational or not. For centralized customs control, we will look into their operational status, goods declaration processed and their number. For custom command fund, we will look into number of disbursements to informers or officers and revenue generated from this activity. So we have created detailed indicators for each reform so that their progress can be measured effectively. This is the register of progress. So after 1 year, out of 13 reforms, 3 reforms are partially operational, which is a centralized customs assessment, presumption against smuggled vehicles, and control of counterfeit excisable goods. So these reforms are operational because we already had infrastructure, and new infrastructure was not required for these reforms. Second category is administratively initiative. For these reforms, 6 reforms are initiated, but for these reforms we needed new infrastructure and systems. So all these reforms are in pre-design or procurement phase. And stage 0, which is legislation only, 4 reforms are in this stage. Custom Command Fund, because no progress has been recorded yet. Restriction on transactions of ineligible person, there is no information publicly available on that. And each reform also requires some official notification, and none of the reform is fully operational yet. So this is the evidence we have collected on each reform. For digital cargo tracking system, expression of interest was advertised in September 2025. Contract with South Korean firm was signed in March 2026, and hopefully in the next 18 months, this system will be operational. In case of digital enforcement stations, 5 stations are partially built, and some checkpoints have been upgraded, which will in future transform into digital enforcement stations. Centralized custom assessment, so it's partially operational in Karachi, and in coming few months it will be rolled out in other provincial capitals. In case of Customs Command Fund, the SRO and notification has been made, but though there is no information on the disbursement. Similarly, in case of presumption against smuggled vehicles, so some progress has been made in this reform area, and we have seen several operations carried out by law enforcement agencies and FBR, and they have confiscated vehicles in Balochistan and KPK. In case of courier misuse, threshold has been reduced and withholding tax has been levied, but there is no publicly available information on the progress. Next is restriction on transaction of ineligible persons. So still we are waiting for federal government gazette notification. And in case of data sharing for compliance, legal amendments have been made, but there is still no evidence of any actual data sharing. And lastly, sales tax enforcement, in which there is powers to block bank accounts and seize property. Still there is a requirement of board notification. Overall, the direction and the nature of these reforms are very important and pertinent, and these reforms have already been carried out in developed and developing economies, and they have proven to be very effective. In case of Pakistan, most of these reforms are in early stages or procurement stages, but the future and effectiveness of these reforms will ultimately depend upon their timely implementation and operationalization.